Hello everybody, this is Mr. Storm. In the last video we created our paddles and we got our player input working so that we can actually move our paddles up and down. But we actually have an error. The ball actually floats through the paddles and it doesn't interact with them at all. As a matter of fact, our ball doesn't interact with anything. It bounces off it doesn't bounce off the edges of the game. It kind of just, it doesn't behave the way we want it to. So let's figure out how to fix this bug. Let's take a look at our script here. And actually we're going to look at our ball script so we can kind of drill down on exactly what this is doing. So if we look at line 11 here, we're using this translate method to move our ball. The problem is that this command actually doesn't trigger or it doesn't register collisions at all. It literally just changes the position of your object. We need to replace it with something that can actually register those collisions and react accordingly. So first, let's create a variable that can store the value of our collisions so that our script can detect it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to, inside this physics process method, let's create a variable. We'll call it collision so that we can store the value of that collision. And we're going to use a method called move and collide. Move and collide. Move and collide is going to move your object, but as soon as it collides with another collider, it's going to register that collision and react in a certain way. We can also move and slide, which would make our object slide along the new thing. We want it to collide because we actually want to bounce off. So we're going to move and collide. And we're going to give it a movement value of velocity multiplied by delta. Okay. So now we can test our game and see how that changes our interactions in our game. So I'm going to save all my scenes and hit play. So our ball is moving just like normal. And when it hits the paddle, well, it did something. It did something different from last time. It didn't just phase through, it stopped. That's not exactly what we want it to do, but at least we're making progress, right? So it is actually moved and collided with the collider attached to this paddle. Okay, great. Now we need to talk about how to make it bounce. We want this ball to bounce whenever it hits anything, the walls, the paddles, whatever. So we learned if statements last week when we were working on our paddle game. We used quite a few if statements to determine if something is happening. We're going to use an if statement here in this script as well. So right underneath of this move and collide, let's create an if, and we'll say if collision, meaning if we collide with something, we want to do something else. We're going to say velocity. So we're going to change our velocity to be equal to velocity.bounce. And we're going to pass in this argument called normal. All right. Velocity equals velocity.bounce collision.normal. What that normal is going to do is it's basically going to bounce in a normalized direction. So the exact opposite direction of the bounce's angle. So it gives it a nice natural looking bounce. Okay, perfect. Now let's go ahead and test this and see if we can make our ball bounce off of the paddle. And it did. It bounced off of it perfectly. So the next thing we want to fix is we want to actually change the game so that our ball doesn't float off of the screen. Now, this is actually pretty easy to do, and we don't need to write any code to make this happen. Because we already wrote the bounce code just a minute ago. And as long as this ball is interacting with other objects, then we can make it bounce off of those objects as well. So let's create a new object to allow this ball to bounce off the edges of our screen. So up here as a child of our Pong node, let's create a new node called a static body 2D. And a static body 2D is just a node that doesn't move, but you can still apply some physics like collisions to it, but it's going to stay in the same place. It's not going to move on its own. All right. Now let's rename this to boundaries so we know what it's actually doing for us in the game. At boundaries. There we go. Let's add a collision shape here. So let's add a collision shape 2D. And we will give it a shape of a rectangle. Okay, so now we have a collision shape 2D at our origin. What we want to do is we want to extend this out so that it actually covers the top of the screen. And I'm going to make it so that it's right on the line there. So that way, as soon as our ball hits the top of the screen, it registers that as a collision and it'll bounce off properly. Now, the nice thing is all we have to do is just kind of redo that for the top, bottom, left, and right. We already have the top. Let's call this top. And let's just add some more collision shape 2Ds for the other directions. We'll make this one the left. All right. Oh, make sure I go all the way down to the bottom and past it a little bit as well so that there's no gaps through which our ball can escape. All right. That is going to be the left. Let's create one for the bottom, collision shape 2D. And let's move it down. Perfect. Extend it out over this way. Perfect. And we will call this bottom. And then we'll make one for the right. Create. Give it a rectangle shape. And move it on over. Okay. Perfect. All right, so now my ball should stay contained within my game scene. Let's move my ball into the middle and hit play. Perfect. Now notice my ball is bouncing off the edges of my game, and it can also bounce off of the paddles as well. So let's have it bounce off that paddle. Perfect. And let's bounce off player one's paddle as well. Beautiful. All right, we have essentially a functioning Pong game, except we have one error left to fix. Notice that our paddles still escape the confines of the game scene. We don't want to do that. So let's take a look at our script for our paddle and see if there's anything that's causing this to happen. Well, we're using move local Y, but that doesn't actually register collisions either, just like the translate method didn't register collisions. So all we really need to do is replace this move local Y with maybe that move and collide method. Okay, well, let's try that. Let's try replacing this with move and collide. And instead of giving it a vector or a negative speed delta, we're going to need to give this a vector 2. So vector 2. Now in a vector 2, the first option is, or the first argument is going to be the x value, which for us it's going to be 0 because we don't actually want to move in the x. The second value is going to be the y. So we're going to give it the same option that we wrote before, minus speed times delta. Okay, perfect. So that is actually the movement that we want to keep that contained within the game scene. Let's go ahead and copy that. And let's paste it here. And for this, we don't want to move in the positive. We want to move in the negative. Or we want to move in a negative as opposed to a positive. Or, yeah, a positive as opposed to a negative. That's what I was trying to say. And we'll paste it here as well. That one's going to be fine. And right here, we'll paste it and get rid of the negative. Okay, with all that fixed, now we should be able to see our game working properly with the paddles being contained into the game scene, which they are. So my player 2 is contained, my player 1 is contained, my ball is bouncing off of things. This is actually coming together pretty nicely. There are a couple of fixes that I want to add to, or that I want to make to this project before we move on to our final video. First of all, our ball moves very slowly, and it's pretty big. So what I want to do is I want to go to my ball object. Let's go down here and find our ball scene, double click on it, and let's go to the ball object. We'll select the ball, and let's resize it. I'm going to change the transform scale to 0.5 by 0.5. Okay, perfect. Now notice that I'm changing the ball node and not just the collision shape in the sprite, because if I change the position or the size on the ball, because these two nodes are children of the ball, then it's going to change their transforms as well. Even though it doesn't look like it's changing, they are changing to correspond with it. So the sprite got smaller, and so did the collision shape. All right, now let's change its speed. Let's go to the script, and up here I have an X speed of 200 and a Y speed of 100. I want to double these. Let's change this to 400 and 200 correspondingly. Let's see if that feels okay. I'm going to play the game. Oh, now it's going much faster, and it actually adds a little bit of challenge. The ball is nice and small. Okay, perfect. All right, beautiful. So now the game feels a little bit more fun, a little bit more dynamic. Okay, the last thing we want to do is we want to add the last piece to our game, which is a HUD, or a heads-up display. We want something that's going to show the score for the game in real time. So what we want to do is we want to create a new node on our user or in our scene, in our Pong scene. We want to create a new node called a canvas layer. Let's click the plus and let's search for canvas layer. All right. Now a canvas layer is essentially going to be a node that covers the entire game screen and allows us to add user interface elements. All right, perfect. Let's see. Okay, all we're really going to need is just a couple of labels. So let's add a child node of this canvas layer. Let's look for label. A label is just a text object. It's going to allow us to put some text onto our screen. I'll put this one roughly about there. And in the text itself, I'm going to type the number 0. All right. Now let's resize the text. So we're going to find the rect option in our inspector. So rectangle. And we're going to change the scale of our rect. Let's make it 5 by 5, just to make it nice and big. And we can actually shrink that a little bit. Now, it doesn't look great. It's a bit fuzzy and whatnot, but that's okay. We're not going to focus too much on our graphics here in this game. We just want it to work. We just want it to be functional. Okay. Now, let's rename this one to P1 score. And let's actually duplicate it by right-clicking and choosing duplicate. And we can change this to P2 score, and we can move it over onto the side of player 2. Now if we play our game, we will see that we have players 1 and player 2 score up at the top of our game, and we can, in the next video, figure out how to update those scores to reflect the actual accurate score of the game at any given time. Perfect. We are very close to being finished. All we have to do is save everything, and in the next video, we will wrap up this game, and you'll have a brand new game that you've built all by yourself. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.